But the Bible also says you shall know them by their fruits. And just look at the fruits of believers through history and today. There's some wonderful Christians, some wonderful Muslims, and I know a lot of them, some great Jews in the world. But as a group, they don't have a corner on anything that we value in this life. But I didn't come to talk about all that. I came to talk about prayer, our National Day of Prayer. We have a national radio show. It's called Free Thought Radio. Trevor, is there some water in the building, like a thing to somebody? Trevor? What did the Bible say? If you give a glass of water to one of the least of these, you've done it unto me, or something. The least of us.
A child.
Yeah, okay. I remember I used to preach that, but it's been, what, 26 years now. So. Prayer. In 1952, Billy Graham, the evangelist, had just come into prominence, national prominence, because the Hearst newspapers saw him as a young preacher who was anti-communist. And they said, let's put this guy up front. And they promoted him, they pushed him, and he became a nationally famous evangelist. And Hearst even said, plug this guy, plug this guy. He went to Washington, D.C. in 1952, and he preached, I think it was 6 weeks, a 6-week crusade. Interesting choice of word, right? Revival meetings or faith meetings at the National Armory and on the steps of the National Capitol. And Billy Graham knew a lot of people. He knew members of Congress, and he made a call. He said, we need to set our nation apart. We need to show that we are not these godless, atheistic communists. We are a God-fearing nation. We need to have a day of prayer, a national day of prayer. Did you find something?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
God bless you, Trevor.
Thank you. Great will be your reward. Not in heaven, but so Billy Graham suggested that the United States of America have a National Day of Prayer. In fact, Billy Graham's sermon is in the Congressional Record. And members of Congress introduced a bill, and who in the mid-1950s would dare be seen voting against God? Nobody. McCarthyism, the scare of communism and all of that, everybody had to show how patriotic they were. And at that time, patriotism meant godliness. That's what it meant at the time. The bill passed very easily. Congress passed a bill requiring that the President of the United States every year issue a proclamation calling on all Americans to pray. The National Day of Prayer. A national day for all Americans. Truman was the first to do it, and every president has done it since then. Well, they have to. It's an act of Congress. They are required to do that by Congress. And in the legislation and in the discussions and in all of the presentation, there was just an overt religious intent. It wasn't for some secular purpose. It was for religious reasons. The ministers, the preachers, the evangelists, they were all saying, yes, America, yes, God bless America, singing Christian hymns and onward Christian soldiers and, you know, this whole rallying around the cross thing. And many of the proclamations over the years included some really bad history. For example, the claim that they had prayer at the Constitutional Convention when our country was formed. That's wrong. That's a lie. There was no official prayer. There might have been some private prayer going on, like anywhere. I mean, even though there's no prayer in the school, as long as there's tests, there's going to be prayer in the school. People are going to be praying private. But officially, there was no prayer at the Constitutional Convention. There was prayer at the earlier Continental Congress, and that thing failed miserably. They prayed there, but they produced a document that was weak and didn't last very long. But at the Constitutional Convention, they produced the Constitution, which has survived more than 2 centuries, the wonderful American principles that are there. Benjamin Franklin got up. He was old, but he got up and he said, let's have a prayer. He asked for a prayer, but there was no second to the motion. They were embarrassed. Future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Jay, said, how can we have a prayer when we all disagree with each other? We're not all in the same, you know, let's leave that to private. There was no prayers at the Constitutional Convention, and there was no mention of the 10 Commandments anywhere in all the minutes. People say our country is based on the 10 Commandments, but they didn't even mention it. How many times do you think they mentioned the Bible during that entire Constitutional Convention? 0. How many times is the word God in the Constitution? Zero. None. How many times is the word Jesus in there? The Declaration of Independence does mention the Creator and Creator's God, but that was Thomas Jefferson's words, and he was a deist. He was a non-Christian. And for him, the Creator and nature's God was really the deistic God of nature. Or in Jefferson's mind, who said, question with boldness even the existence of a God, the Creator was nature itself. He was sort of a pre-Darwinian freethinker. Before Darwin, those Enlightenment freethinkers were more deistic. They didn't think there was a being up there who wrote books and did miracles and any of that stuff. But they did think there might have been a first cause. And so in Jefferson's mind, there was a natural kind of creator. There's no Jesus in the Declaration. In fact, the Declaration of Independence is quite anti-biblical. The Bible doesn't say anything about democracy or about we the people, the right of the governed to govern themselves. There's no equality in the Bible. All that stuff is Enlightenment, scientific thinking, not biblical teaching. How many times was the word God mentioned at the Constitutional Convention itself? Actually, 3 times. Jefferson's request for prayer, and then somebody got up and said something like, "Good God, we can't have that." That was one mention. And then there was a third mention. I don't remember the exact quote, but it has something to do with comparing, well, are we building a constitution based on the people or based on God? God was not invoked. God was not even a part. Ten Commandments, Bible. Our Constitutional Convention was a totally secular event, although many of the founders were believers. Many of them thought Jesus was real and morality was real. Thomas Jefferson believed in some kind of deity, but he took a pair of scissors to the Bible and he cut out a bunch of the crap. And if you think that's too strong of a word to talk about the Bible, the word that Jefferson used was dunghill. Today he might use a different word, but he wrote a letter to Adams. You can buy that Bible, by the way. Do you know that the Jefferson Bible, he cut out, he said, there's a bunch of, he said, looking for good words of Jesus in the Bible is like digging through a dunghill to find a diamond. Well, he did find some diamonds, and he kept them in, and he cut it, and he cut the New Testament down to a little short, and he said, there, okay, if that's what it means to be a Christian, you could call me a Christian. But he threw out all the miracles, all the crazy stuff, and he said, there's some good teachings in there. It would be surprising if there were not. In any event, in the 1950s, when the National Day of Prayer legislation was passed, and many of these proclamations, they erroneously say we've had, ever since our Constitutional Convention, and ever since then, we've had a regular prayer for our country. That's not true. There have been some proclamations for others. There have been some Thanksgiving proclamations that mention a prayer, but there never was a National Day of Prayer, or a day of prayer. In fact, our first Congress passed a treaty, voted on a treaty that explicitly says to Tripoli, the Bay of Tripoli, that the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian nation. Our founders voted on that, and it was written under Washington, and then it was signed under Adams' presidency. The United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That was the intent of our founders. But if you listen to the religious right, the whole country was based on Jesus and God and the Bible and the Ten Commandments, and that's why we have our rights, and because we've been endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights and so on. So we thought it was important to correct the historical record. In 1988, some members of the religious right, including Vonette Bright, who was Bill Bright's wife, Campus Crusade for Christ, the honorary chair Pat Boone, an evangelical right-wing entertainer, and others, they were complaining because even though there was this National Day of Prayer that they wanted to observe, there was no fixed date for it. Each president would pick a different day of the year. And some presidents it looked like they forgot about it. It was like the last week of December. Oh, we better have a National Day of Prayer. And they would issue a proclamation. They would write these words and have it proclaimed. The press secretary would proclaim it. And so they said, it's hard for us to organize our religious events around this National Day of Prayer. And they petitioned Congress, and Reagan signed it. They changed it so that the National Day of Prayer now happens on the first Thursday of every May. Last year it was May the 6th. This year it will be May the 5th. So since then, they've been really excited because now they can plan. And that year, a group started called the National Day of Prayer Task Force, which is currently run by a woman named Shirley Dobson. Do you know that name, Dobson? Her husband is James Dobson, who runs Focus on the Family. I think he's just retired or retired. But in any event, the National Day of Prayer Task Force is housed in the same building in Colorado Springs as the Focus on the Family is, James Dobson's group. So it's a real right-wing Christian thing. And our lawsuit, we sued over this, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, found out that all through the whole history of this National Day of Prayer, it's been very divisive. The religious right thinks they own it. And not only have Jews and Muslims and non-believers been frozen out of these events on the state capitals and all that, but even non-evangelical Christians have not been allowed to participate in these events because the right-wing evangelicals think, this is our territory, this is our thing. It kind of reminds me of those territorial animals that like to go around marking off their boundaries, you know, this is ours, this is ours. They want to put their stamp on it. It's supposed to be for all Americans, but it's obviously, it was suggested by the religious evangelical right, Christians. The scripture verses that they pick are all biblical verses. They've never quoted from the Quran. They're all either Judeo-Christian. This National Day of Prayer Task Force writes the proclamation, sends it to the president, and sends it to all the governors. In fact, all the governors of every state have issued this proclamation along with the National Day of Prayer. Even though there's no state day of prayer for these groups, they still want to do it. And a lot of mayors and a lot of county executives. The National Day of Prayer Task Force picks the theme and the Bible verse, and almost always the governors and the president, especially George Bush, when Bush was in office, he took exactly word for word. He took it from this private group and issued the National Day of Prayer in the words and the theme and the Bible verse of this private evangelical group. In fact, George Bush invited them into the White House. They had big parties and big prayer meetings and big revival, and they invited in Shirley Dobson and all these religious right people to come in. Yes, this is a Christian nation. It's a wonderful thing. And almost every governor, there was one governor who refused to do it. Do you know who that was? Do you remember? It wasn't in Iowa. But not far from here. Jesse Ventura, one year. He said, I only have civil secular authority that's been granted to me. I've not been granted any religious authority over the people. So what business do I have calling people, the citizens of the state, to pray? If they want to pray, let them pray. That's their thing. It's free. It's a free country. But I'm not going to be involved in it. He was very brave. A little eccentric maybe, but very brave. And maybe they go hand in hand. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not talking about Trevor, of course, but some free thought leaders have that edge to them, which is kind of nice. You know, we're not afraid to be different. But so in Wisconsin, where we live, where I live, the governor has always gone up and they have these big National Day of Prayer meetings in the state capitals. Well, a few years ago, we got a complaint from one of our members. We have 16,000 members around the country now. I remember up in some county north of Madison, Wisconsin, that the sheriff was having a National Day of Prayer breakfast. And the invitation went out from the sheriff's office, the sheriff's stationery, as an official county event. And one of our members up there said, can they do that? Can our secular county get up and actually invite people to a religious meeting? That's different from a private prayer breakfast, which happens all the time, inviting a mayor in, and which is okay. If a mayor goes to one of these, or a county exec goes to one of these private prayer breakfasts, as Obama did with this prayer breakfast just recently, there's another national prayer breakfast, which is not even connected with the National Day of Prayer. It's a private event, but it looks kind of like it's a public event. Well, as long as a public official makes it clear that they are attending as a private citizen, not representing the state or the city, that's okay. We're not going to complain about that. But here it was an invitation from the sheriff's office inviting the people to that prayer breakfast in conjunction with the National Day of Prayer on that Thursday, the first Thursday in May. And so we thought, wait, that's crossing the line. There's religious freedom. Those people can have their prayer if they want, but for an elected official to invite people to a prayer breakfast, that's crossing the line. So we decided we would complain and maybe sue in that county, but the plaintiff there, the member, got cold feet and said, I don't want my name. I don't want anybody to know it's me. And you can imagine in some parts of the country, you've got to keep your head down, especially if you're running a business or running a company. Do we have any FFR members here tonight? Well, some of you came. Wow. How did you hear about it? It was on the webpage, right? Well, thanks.